Welcome to a very special edition of ChedHER celebrating International Women's Day, sponsored by JPMorgan Chase. I'm Kristen Scholler.
Hello, Kristen. Hi, everybody. I'm Hannah Doba. While JPMorgan Chase is the presenting sponsor of the show, the opinions and statements are Cheddar's.
Hannah, it is wonderful to see you today and to celebrate with our amazing crew of women here at Cheddar. International Women's Day is an event celebrating the many achievements of women throughout history and across the globe. It's a day that's been observed since the early 1900s, believe it or not, and it does date back to 1908 when thousands of women went on strike and marched through the streets of New York City demanding shorter hours and better pay. A year later, the first National Women's Day was observed across the country, and during an international conference of working women in Copenhagen in 1910, the idea of an International Women's Day came about. The following year, Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland jointly brought the idea to life and honored International Women's Day on March 19th. It was Russia that then set the March 8th trend when it observed the day back in 1913.
Russia, that is so interesting. This year's campaign theme is Choose to Challenge, and when you challenge something, you can change something. According to the International Women's Day website, it says we can all choose to challenge and call out gender bias and inequality. We can all choose to seek out and celebrate women's achievements. Collectively, we can all help create an inclusive world. Today is a day when we can raise awareness about women's equality and push for more representation. Today is just a day to show just how powerful women are and what areas of society we can improve on. So that's exactly what we're going to do in the next hour. Though it seemed like every headline was bad news over the last year, there were so many historical moments for women. Let's start with Kamala Harris, the first female vice president in U.S. history. New Zealand appointing its first Indigenous female foreign minister. Scotland becoming the first country to make period products free for all. After years of campaigning, Afghani citizens will have their mothers' names printed on their national ID cards. And finally, Brazil's female players are being paid the same as its male players.
I love to see those milestones, Hannah, and even we know the Fortune 500 does have a record number now of female CEOs. There is much to celebrate, but there is still much work to be done. So we can't lose focus on the goals that we want to accomplish. The impact of crises are not gender neutral. There's no doubt that this pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women, especially mothers, senior level women, and Black women. Women are bearing the brunt of the economic fallout of the coronavirus. And when we take a look inside corporate America, representation of women was slowly trending upward before the pandemic. Now, according to McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report, 1 in 4 women are considering downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce due to COVID-19. Women make up nearly 40% of global employment, but account for more than 50% of overall job losses. And in order to help women most impacted by the virus, companies and organizations must help to reduce the additional pressures these women are experiencing.
That's right. Take the time today to call a female friend, a coworker, your mom, your wife, just to say thank you for all you do, or simply, I'm proud of you. Let's support, challenge, and empower each other. There is a lot we can learn from this pandemic. International Women's Day is just a starting point to recognize the goal of a more gender-balanced world. We're bringing awareness to areas we can improve. And Kristen, I'm so excited to do this show with you. I love you. I love all the women that we work with on this show, especially because we put a lot of effort into these shows and getting these stories of so many important women across. As you mentioned, the Fortune 500 and how we're seeing more CEOs. Right now, currently, 8% of CEOs are female. Long way to go, but a lot better than expected. And just in the last year, let's think about this. Women have played an instrumental role in developing COVID-19 vaccinations. They actually helped NASA land the rover on Mars, and not to mention the sports world, where we saw a new general manager for the Miami Marlins. Happened to be a female, the first coach, Katie Sowers, who actually made it to the Super Bowl. These are incredible stories that we haven't heard in the past or even just a year ago.
There is so much to celebrate, Hannah, and I'm so honored each and every day to co-anchor with you, co-anchor with our other female colleagues that are absolute rock stars at this company. We know the pandemic has been challenging, but I think it's a good time for us to come together and really look at ways to move gender equality forward in the future. You shared some of those amazing highlights, and I know we're going to be talking about them throughout this entire show. I think another highlight just today is Joe Biden, the President of the United States, creating that gender equality council within the White House that is going to make prescriptions and be part of every foreign and domestic policy issue, trying to improve the workplace, weed out discrimination, and of course help college students as well. That was a big part of this. And so hopefully we can see real efforts in good faith to improve gender equality going forward and real results. And I think a lot of it starts by having the conversation, and I'm glad that we can have this conversation together today. Coming up, everyone, on ChedHER, we're going to break down gender disparity in the workforce. We'll discuss the struggles women are facing to continue their careers amid the pandemic. Stick with us.
Welcome back to ChedHER, brought to you by JPMorgan Chase, the bank that advances women everywhere. The pandemic has created what some are calling the she session, as women find themselves disproportionately impacted when it comes to their careers. Women have been bearing the brunt of most pandemic-related job losses, as well as those caregiving responsibilities. As of February of 2021, roughly 2.3 million women are missing from the U.S. workforce, compared to 1.8 million men. Gender inequality in the workforce has only been made worse by the already persistent gender wage gap in our country. Joining us now for a roundtable discussion is Erin, CEO and founder of the ConnectEO network, and Vasu, Reddy, senior policy counsel at National Partnerships for Women and Families. Ladies, welcome to the show. Such an important subject. Thank you for your time. Vasu, let's start with you. The National Partnership for Women and Families has released research to quantify the gender wage gap based on race and ethnicity. What are some of your key findings here?
Thank you for having me. Unsurprisingly, we have found that while there remains a persistent wage gap between all men and women of any race working full-time year-round, that those gaps are even more persistent and even wider for women of color, between women of color and white men. So Black women are paid about 60 cents on the dollar, 63 cents on the dollar, sorry, and about 56 cents for Latina women, and for Native American women and Asian American women. There's not as much data out there, but the data shows that we do have shows that these gaps are extremely wide and persistent. And we know that this is something that is going to continue because of the disproportionate job losses that we're seeing with the pandemic.
I was looking at that graphic our amazing production team made. 60 cents on the dollar, 70 cents on the dollar. There it is. That's just absolutely incredible. Latinos are typically paid 55 cents on the dollar. So Erin, can you tell us a little bit more about ConnectEO Network and how it can be used as a tool to provide opportunities for entrepreneurs, specifically women, in order to close this huge wage gap that we're seeing?
Absolutely, yes. The numbers are disproportionate, and ConnectEO is here to close that wealth gap and that wage gap by providing opportunities and resources, because what we're seeing is a lot of women are leaving the normal corporate traditional structure and starting their own and building their own, and ConnectEO is here to provide business resources to create sustainable businesses to help close that wealth gap.
Erin, if I could stay with you for a second, what have been some of the biggest challenges for female entrepreneurs, of course, during this pandemic and this she session that we're now seeing?
Some of the biggest challenges that we're noticing is really knowing where to start, building that community, and getting access to resources. And some of the challenges that we've been seeing is women are being while there are still a lot of progress that has been made, women are still being treated differently than men. The questions, even in entrepreneurship, that women are being asked are different. They're more risk assessment questions like, how many users do you have? What's your revenue? Things like that, as opposed to men who are typically asked questions that kind of highlight their potential. And so ConnectEO is here to kind of help women work together, build that network, and bring other women along.
That is so interesting. Vasu, to you, why do you think women are more affected by this damaged economy amid the pandemic?
It's a lot of the factors that Erin already laid out, but there's the history of discrimination that has been rampant against women of color in this country, which has only embedded itself further in our institutions. And that has contributed to why the gap is especially wide for women of color. Old-fashioned discrimination is still a huge part of it. And the caregiving responsibilities that disproportionately fall on women are especially pronounced now because of the inability to arrange for childcare during school closures, and the need to deal with virtual schooling means that women are more likely taking on these responsibilities, and because of that are having to make sacrifices at work that then mean that they don't have as much money to pay for their housing, to pay for their children's food, and all of the other family support that women are providing.
This next question is for both of you. Vasu, I will stick with you and then move on to you, Erin. What tools do you think that women need right now, not only to close this gender wage gap, but just to feel supported in this current job market that we're in?
So I think the awareness that you all are raising and other groups that do a lot of work on the wage gap are raising is really important, because a lot of times people don't even know that there's a problem or don't believe that it's something that is worth fighting. And knowing that this is such a huge problem for everyone, I think really builds a sense of solidarity. There is, I think, the culture change among the private sector is really great, and hearing from from leaders like Erin about their commitment to ending this wage gap is really important. Again, in knowing that you'll be supported if you try to raise these issues at work, because too many women face retaliation or job loss if they try to raise these issues. But ultimately, we can't have any sort of solution without policies that end discriminatory practices, improve enforcement, improve transparency of wages, and then other policies that build worker power and protect family economic security. We need a higher minimum wage. We need paid sick days and paid family and medical leave. We need everyone to have the right to unionize, and we need support for care responsibilities. All of these issues are really interlinked in why this gap is so wide, and also why it has such huge consequences.
Guys, I've ran out of time. We really appreciate your insight and expertise here. Erin Person, CEO and founder of the ConnectEO Network, and Vasu Reddy, Senior Policy Counsel and National Partnership for Women and Families. Ladies, happy International Women's Day. Thank you again. We hope you come back. On the other side, the pandemic has been hard on women because the U.S. economy is hard on women. There's been an increased pressure on mothers, especially. I want to bring in our Jill Wagner to talk more about that. Hi, Jill.
Hey, Hannah. Working moms have always had to juggle between a job and parenting, and that can be tough even if the best of times. But in a pandemic, a lot of the safety nets that parents count on, like in-person school and childcare, are gone. And that has made for a very difficult year for a lot of parents. So I sat down with 4 moms from across the country to talk all about parenting during the pandemic.
It's been a fiasco, and I think everyone can agree to that. You know, I joke. I have a twin, so I have a 12-year-old, I have a 3-year-old, a toddler, and I have a baby who is 1, and I'm also pregnant. So I'm experiencing every single phase of motherhood in this pandemic, and it's hard. It's tough. You're trying to do right by your kids, and you're also trying to do right, by yourself, right? Your own ambition and your own work and your own career. And I think that has been the challenge for a lot of women. I think we've seen the mass exodus, right, of women during this pandemic, where women have left the workforce at a disproportionately higher rate than men. And so, it begs the question, who are these women, right? And we found out that a lot of these women are mothers that have been quote unquote forced out, right? because of lack of childcare, because they lack the supports that they need at work, because society still believes that the role of caregiving is for the woman.
Emily T., I want to bring you in here because I know you're an event planner, which is not the ideal job during a pandemic when all in-person events were pretty much put on hold for the foreseeable future. So you voluntarily, or not necessarily voluntarily, you scaled back your career a bit. What went into that decision?
My decision to scale my hours back was twofold. It was one, knowing the work just is not there. I'm not going to lie to my company and be like, oh yeah, it's full time. I got tons to do. Here you go. Because I want them to know, like, I'm honest. And if it comes time to make those hard decisions, I hope that they would see that, I made this sacrifice to help their bottom line, and maybe are more willing to keep me on for the long haul while we ride this out. And the second part was, for my family. I knew at some point this winter that something was going to happen. Someone was going to get a cold, or maybe someone in my household was going to get COVID, and we were going to need to pivot and be able to do our jobs at home. And by scaling my hours back, it made it much, much easier for my husband and I to do that.
Amna, you're a pediatrician, and you have a child, and you're pregnant.
When baby comes, I have to think about scaling back because there's only so much of me. And to be able to provide my best work, I have to be able to set limits and boundaries. And that is certainly one thing I've become very comfortable doing as a female business owner. But also during COVID, I feel very comfortable saying, no. No, I can't do this right now, and I can't spread myself so thin, and I won't do my best work, not only as a physician, but also as a mother and as a wife if I'm spread thin.
I actually went from working like a less number of hours, like 35 hours a week, to working full time during this.
Oh, wow.
Which is
why? Tell us about that.
So, I'm the one providing the daycare. You know what I mean? My school is open. We're infants through 8th grade. And not a lot of places are open. Our public schools have been either hybrid or remote. And they needed me. It actually wasn't even a conversation, which is something I have some feelings about. But it went from working 34 hours a week to working 40. Because we're in these pod systems now. We don't have teachers move between groups, which includes our assistants. And we just literally just need more people, because if one of my kids pop symptoms, if I have any symptoms, if someone in my pod has, COVID, then we're out. And that's just really hard. We don't want to close any classrooms, obviously, because we are providing the childcare. In addition to I really strongly believe that children need to learn in person in early childhood education. Even our kindergarten, our first grade children, they are not made to sit and do this remote. So it's been a really high priority to be at work, and to have my kids be able to be there. But it's been really hard. And I feel a lot of guilt when I'm out, but I also have anxiety when I'm there. I'm currently quarantining, and my classroom is closed because we made it. We've been in person since the end of June, but finally happened to us. It's been hard.
And you could just see the emotional toll that this pandemic is taking such an amazing group of moms. On the lighter side, they all told me they could find the silver lining in this pandemic. Mostly it's just slowing down and spending extra time with their kids and their family. Be sure to check out the full conversation. That'll be up later today on ChedHER.com. Hannah, I'm going to send it back to you.
Incredible roundtable, Jill. It's always so important to get that perspective. I will check out the full conversation. I'm looking forward to it. Jill Wagner in Long Island. Thank you so much, Jill. And coming up on ChedHER, we're joined by the CEO of Time's Up to discuss the caregiving crisis and why we need to start investigating in caregiving infrastructure. That's after a very short break.
Welcome back to ChedHER, brought to you by JPMorgan Chase, the bank that advances women everywhere. Well, we know that women are being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and part of the reason behind this is the caregiving crisis causing women to leave the workforce. Our next guest is working to advance gender equality, particularly for these working women. She's held roles as the former assistant to President Barack Obama, executive director of the White House Council on Women and Girls, and chief of staff to former First Lady Michelle Obama. Joining me now is Tchen, president and CEO of Time's Up. Tina, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Oh, I'm delighted. Happy International Women's Day.
And same to you. Let's dive right in here. President Biden today signing an executive order establishing a gender policy council to advance gender equality and equity in domestic and foreign policy. What do you hope comes out of this?
Well, I am thrilled with today's announcement. It's something that those of us in the women's community have really been advocating for and looking forward to at Time's Up, at United States of Women, and elsewhere. It really is an improvement on what we did with the White House Council on Women and Girls during the Obama years by making it a gender policy council to cover, what we now understand about gender and gender discrimination, include gender fluid, transgender, everyone who's affected by gender discrimination, and to have, additional staff attached to it. I'm looking forward to having the entire Biden cabinet do what the entire Obama cabinet did, which was to embrace these issues and work with them within each agency, and then work on a lot of issues like addressing this caregiving crisis that are cut across agencies. So there will be true leadership coming from the White House.
Let's talk more about the caregiving crisis. What kind of impact is it having on women? What is the data that you've seen? What have you heard? And women of color in particular?
Well, I think as you just showed on your last segment, women of color in particular have been dropping out of the workforce, have been hit hard by the unemployment rate. This last month's unemployment numbers that just got released on Friday demonstrate that Black and Latino women have 1.5 times the unemployment rate as the rest of the population because they're in, jobs like hospitality and restaurants where they've lost their jobs, but they also don't have access to caregiving. So many women are having to make that choice. Some of the moms that you just talked to in your roundtable are having to make a choice of how do you balance the demands of work with home. So we know that actually right now, women's labor force participation in the United States is at the levels from 1980. We have not seen levels this low in decades. So we've wiped out all the progress we had made. And a big reason for that is that we don't have a caregiving infrastructure in this country. We do not have supports, public or employer provided supports for families to balance not just childcare, but also the needs of caring for elderly parents, for sick relatives, for a spouse, for yourself when you're sick. Let's get real. We are one of only 2 countries in the world that has no national paid leave policy of any kind. That's got to change.
Extremely striking there, Tina. And from the moms that we've been hearing from throughout this crisis, we know the here and now is extremely challenging. And then the long term, also a concern. What kind of long-term implications can this caregiving crisis have in the fight for gender equity?
Well, what it means, and we're seeing it right now, is that women are dropping out of the workforce. And this is not just women at the lower end of the wage scale. It's also women who are moving up the ranks, who are about to become in the C-suite, who are about to become senior partners at law firms. And we also know that in order to combat things like sexual harassment that Time's Up focuses on, we need women, people of color, LGBTQ, disabled workers, at every level of our workplaces. They need to be represented in leadership as well as in middle management and in the front lines. And if we keep excluding women, if we don't have structural policies that will help support women in getting into the workplace and staying in the workplace throughout their careers, we are never going to achieve safe, fair, and dignified work for everyone.
Let's talk about some of those prescriptions. I know Time's Up just releasing new research making the case for investments in caregiving infrastructure, as you've been speaking about. What are the key findings and what are some of the prescriptions?
Well, look, we took the Biden-Harris campaign proposal, which proposed a $77 billion annual investment in a broad range of caregiving supports like affordable childcare, paid leave, affordable in-home care services through Medicare for the elderly, for protections and fair wages for caregivers as a labor force. If you take all of those investments, if you do the economic analysis, you find it creates jobs. Not a big surprise to those of us who've been working on it, but we ran the economic analysis. If you make those investments, you will create 2 million new jobs a year. You will generate $220 billion of economic activity every year. And that doesn't even count the fact that you are investing in jobs that will allow someone else to go to work, thereby also stimulating the economy. So this is infrastructure that we need in the next infrastructure bill that goes through Congress, because it is even more shovel ready, I would suggest, than any road or bridge project that someone's going to put on the table.
Obviously, it's clear that we need the public sector to show up, Tina, but I would guess that you also would say we need the private sector to be in on this as well. And I know you're hosting caregiving roundtables with leaders across industries to help find solutions as well. What are some actionable ways that businesses can support their caregiving employees?
Yeah, I will say that this is the first time in decades of doing this work that I've seen employers really realize that they have a stake in this too. Right? We've had manufacturing companies that have reported they can't field a full shift on their manufacturing floor because their workers are at home with caregiving responsibilities. So what can employers do? They don't have to wait for Congress to act. Employers can provide flexible scheduling right now to their workers. They can provide paid leave. Just because we don't have a national policy on paid leave doesn't mean an employer can't provide paid leave. You can actually provide care, on-site childcare support. If you're not bringing all your workers back, and take some of that empty space and convert it to on-site childcare, and not just preschool age. We now know that school age kids need someplace to go, to be in Zoom school or to be somewhere after school. Those are the ways that employers can lead in this moment. And I would say finally to employers, listen to your employees, ask them what they need, be in a partnership with them, and that actually is what's going to improve your bottom line, make you more sustainable in the future, make you more globally competitive with your competitors in other countries where they do have public support for caregiving.
Tina, we are grateful to have you as part of our International Women's Day celebration on ChedHER today. Thank you so much for joining. That's Tina Tchen, President and CEO of Time's Up. JP Morgan Chase is committed to providing women with opportunities to succeed in their personal and professional lives through its Women on the Move program. To learn more, visit jpmorganchase.com/WOTM. Coming up on ChedHER, women are fighting for gender parity when it comes to international politics. We're going to sit down with the Deputy Executive Director from UN Women to discuss what is at stake on the other side of this break. Welcome back to ChedHER, brought to you by JP Morgan Chase, the bank that advances women everywhere. Well, as we celebrate women today, we're still far from reaching gender parity at the highest level of governments across the world. And according to the latest UN Women report, at the current rate, gender parity won't happen for another 130 years. I'm joined now by Anita Bhatia, UN Women's Deputy Executive Director for Resource Management. Anita, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for joining. I do want to talk about this report. Why will it take more than a century to reach parity?
It's a great question, and thank you for having me. I've been listening with interest to the women you interviewed before me, and they all had such great things to say. So I want to add to that and say the reason it's going to take that long, but of course we can change that, is because there are, number one, real gender stereotypes and cultural norms in most countries in the world, which make it really hard for women to run for office. Number two, there is a real issue today, but it existed even before the pandemic with the child care burden. Even before the pandemic, women were doing 3 times as much unpaid care work as men. And that number has just shot up exponentially during the pandemic. And number 3, violence against women. Believe it or not, in many parts of the world, when women run for office, they are harassed, they're abused, and they are subject to violence. So as long as we have those conditions in place, it's going to be really hard for women to run for office. And that's why we are so concerned about getting people to focus on this issue so that we don't have to wait 130 years. Maybe we have to wait 10, but no more than that.
What are the actions, Anita, that we need to see around the world from leaders in all different places to fix this?
I'm glad you said all different places, because this is not something that can be done just by governments. It is a whole of society approach that's needed. But the first thing we can do, and we know this works because we've seen this in countries, is we can have political commitment and political leaders leading by example and saying, we're going to have gender equal cabinets. Guess how many countries in the world today have gender equal cabinets? 14. 14 countries. Out of all of the member states of the UN, we have 14 countries with gender equal cabinets. The second thing people can do is to say, you know what, we're going to have targets. We're going to have quotas. We're going to insist that there are quotas for women parliamentarians, for example, because today, just 25%, yes, just 25% of all national legislators across the world are women. That's just too little.
And I know that your report specifically looked at violence and harassment against women. Anita, I want you to outline the findings there and again, collectively speak, I mean, at every level, regardless of whether or not you're a leader or an executive, how every person at a personal level can make sure that that stops.
Yeah, it is really important that this become something that everybody cares about and not just those of us who work on women's rights and gender equality. This has got to be something that men and boys are involved in too. This is a universal agenda because its impacts are going to be felt not just in the family, but they're felt in the community, they're felt in the country. So we know that not only has physical violence against women shot up exponentially during the pandemic. It was pretty bad to begin with, but it just got a lot worse. But also cyber violence against women has really gone up. And that kind of harassment and violence is a real deterrent to women entering into political life. And so that has got to be we have to put an end to that now so that we actually are able to achieve gender parity in our lifetimes.
Anita, we commend the work that you're doing, and thank you so much for sitting down with us today during our Women's Special. That's Anita Bhatia, UN Women's Deputy Executive Director. All right, here in the U.S., women are breaking barriers with each political cycle, and Cheddar's own Megan Prats highlights 3 of those trailblazers making waves in Washington.
2021 is already historic for women in politics. Congress swore in its most female and most diverse class of lawmakers ever. But with women still making up less than 25% of our legislative body overall, there's room for improvement. So for the women making moves in politics, here are some of the modern-day trailblazers to keep your eye on. Nancy Mace represents South Carolina's 1st congressional district, the first woman to represent the Palmetto State in Congress in nearly 3 decades. But it isn't her first time making history. Mace graduated from the Citadel in South Carolina, the first woman to do so in its history. Then she advised businesses before jumping into politics to be a field director for Donald Trump's campaign. The single mom served 2 terms in the South Carolina State House before throwing her hat in the ring for a seat in Congress. Since she's been in Washington, she's made a name for herself as a strong conservative voice, even as she's raised criticism about the former president in the wake of the January 6th insurrection. Mace flipped her district from blue to red and will be one of the top targets in 2022. Catalina Cruz is a state assembly member in New York, representing Queens in the state capitol. Cruz is a Democrat and an attorney fighting for tenant protections, immigration reform, and rights for workers. She is also one of the only former Dreamers to serve in elected office. Cruz came to the United States from Colombia at 9 years old and spent the next 10 years living without documentation. Her single mother worked several jobs to support her 4 children and inspired her daughter to make life better for other immigrant families. With a career almost entirely devoted to public service, Cruz ran for election to the State House in 2018. Now in her 2nd term, Cruz is a lawmaker to watch, not just in Albany, but to see how she builds a nationwide presence in the country's 4th most populous state. LaTosha Brown isn't a politician, but she knows politics better than most. The founder of Black Voters Matter, Brown has spent years building up a base of voters in the South, a region known for its restrictive voter laws. Her work in Georgia in particular is credited with the state flipping blue in 2020 for the first time in nearly 30 years. The Peach State then repeated the trend when it elected 2 Democratic senators in a runoff election in January. Brown wants to elevate the voices of Black voters and increase the political power of these often marginalized communities. With Black Voters Matter, Brown focuses on educating Black communities about how to vote, where to vote, and why to vote. As Georgia emerges as a new battleground in American politics, Brown's work is just beginning. Now, there are so many amazing women in politics doing amazing things. So these are just a few of the groundbreakers to watch in the years to come.
All right, thanks to Megan Prats for that report. Coming up on ChedHER, everyone, we're going to speak to the head of content and creator partnerships at Pinterest about how the company is celebrating International Women's Day. Stick with us.
Welcome back to ChedHER, brought to you by JPMorgan Chase, the bank that advances women everywhere. Many companies are empowering women in celebration of International Women's Day. One specific company is Pinterest, the social site where 3 out of 4 users are women. I want to bring in our own Michelle Castillo, who has more on this story. Michelle.
Thanks, Hannah. Yes, the social platform is promoting a new Pinterest shop collection to feature a range of female-founded small businesses. Joining us now is Aya Kane, head of content and creator partnerships at Pinterest. Aya, tell us a little bit more about how this initiative can help women run businesses.
Well, it's really such an exciting moment at Pinterest, and support small businesses as a search term increased more than 4 times as pinners last year looked to individual makers and companies to shop online. And so it was natural that for International Women's Day, we launched a brand new Pinterest shop featuring more than 25 female-founded small businesses from around the world, including the United States, Canada, Australia, Germany, Argentina, Mexico, India, and the United Kingdom. All of these shops feature handmade products from hundreds of different merchants designed and imagined by women. And we helped these small businesses upload their product catalog and onboarded them into our verified merchant program. These 2 elements are such an important way for small businesses to get the visibility that they need as people are going into stores less frequently.
Why do women-led businesses need our help at this time, especially during the pandemic?
Well, I believe the statistic is that over 2 million women lost employment over the past year. And so this idea that Pinterest is able to see a little bit of what people are searching for. Searches for women supporting women doubled. Small business plans increased 50 times on Pinterest, and searches for starting a business at home quadrupled. So this ability for us to see what pinners are looking at really helps us understand how women, and 3 out of 5 US adult women are Pinterest users, to see what women are thinking about and how they are making that path forward for themselves and for their family.
Why do you think women in particular were affected more by the pandemic? Do you think it's because a lot of people expect them to also take on, I guess, childcare needs and additional household tasks in addition to their daily jobs?
You know, it's interesting because I don't know whether people expect it of them. As a mom myself and a full-time working person, I expect it of myself. I feel like no one has placed it upon me, but I certainly expect myself to juggle all the elements of parenthood, working from home, and making sure that my career is flourishing on top of everything else that we have going on, and what everyone in the world is living through.
You mentioned some of these trends that Pinterest has noticed throughout the pandemic. What are some insights that you guys can take from that to help other small businesses thrive during this time?
So the key element that Pinterest is able to use to help consumers find new brands is our catalog upload tools and our verified merchant program. One of the really interesting things about Pinterest as a platform is that it's an amazing place to be discovered, because 97%, yes, 97% of the top searches on Pinterest are unbranded. So what that means is that customers are searching for something. They're searching for their next big idea. idea. Maybe you're redecorating your apartment or trying to find a way to upgrade your work from home setup. I know I did that on Pinterest. So all these elements are people who are searching for their next big idea. And so because of that, when we work with retailers and merchants and certainly small businesses, we're able to surface the best ideas to find our users their perfect solution.
One other thing you guys did this year, which I thought was really cool, is you started an International Women's Day Fund. How does that nonprofit work?
So in addition to supporting small businesses with our International Women's Day shop, we really felt it was important to take a company action. And so we set up the International Women's Day Fund and partnered with nonprofits helping women succeed, like the Global Fund for Women and the National Domestic Workers Alliance. So for the month of March, Pinterest will match all of employee donations, which is pretty amazing. Certainly as a Pinterest employee, I'll be taking advantage of that.
And besides shopping at women-owned businesses, how else can you support women entrepreneurs at this time?
I think that becoming a creator on Pinterest and bringing your retail catalog onto Pinterest makes such a big difference. I think that the discoverability on Pinterest is truly second to none. And we are able to make sure that we're driving new customers to exciting new products because it's a win-win. It's a win for the pinners and the users who come to Pinterest every day. Over 450 million monthly active users globally. So that is quite a big audience. So we're able to drive new customers. And of course, we're able to bring a supportive environment, a positive supportive environment where retailers know that they will be aligned with the content that they see surrounding their products.
Well, we're going to have to put a pin in it today. Thanks to Aya Kane, that's the head of Henna, back to you.
I was on Pinterest for hours over the weekend, Michelle. Thank you so much. And coming up on ChedHER, what does International Women's Day mean to you? Kristen and I share our final thoughts. That's next. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to ChedHER, brought to you by JPMorgan Chase, the bank that advances women everywhere.
Henna, we have learned a lot today over the past hour, from the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women to how we can support women-owned small businesses. And we went through some of the firsts that we saw over the last year to the areas of society we do still need to improve. We had a great lineup of guests from all different areas. And Henna, I have to end by asking you, what does International Women's Day mean to you?
Yeah, such inspiring women, Kristen. I think it is what we're doing today. I've been doing news for such a long time. And if someone told me years ago that, hey, you're going to be doing a weekly show or even an annual show like this one today, just celebrating women, I never would have believed that. And the topics we touched on is these millions of women who have lost their jobs or simply were forced to leave the workforce, whether it was to take care of their children or simply couldn't find that balance. I think this is such an important message that we are so much stronger together and just supporting each other and having these conversations with each other.
That's so true. A female flock much stronger together, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, the fact that we're having these conversations, I think, is a win to begin with, and we still have goals to reach and ways to get there, and I think a lot of that was outlined here in the past hour. I also think the data shows, and it's shown for a long time, that companies that have more women in decision-making roles do perform better. They see a better bottom line, i.e. better profits. And of course, we know women for a long time have made up the majority of household spending. So listening to women, marketing to women,
yes,
getting women's voices on marketing campaigns, and of course, just appreciating women, I think, is a major takeaway that we should learn from this. We're all in it together, and I've just been so honored to join you and the rest of our female crew, Jill, Megan, Michelle. It's really been a wonderful hour.
Yeah, let's not forget our producers, Lauren and Tracy and Sam, all of us. Again, this show was put together by women. We put a lot of effort into this because we want to get these conversations going, and we want to get the story of these incredible women, whether it's in our newsroom or around the world, out to our viewers.
Exactly right. Our lady crew is strong, and we hope that this show was helpful to many people out there watching today. Hannah, always a pleasure. We're going to have to leave it there. That is going to do it for today's special edition of ChedHER celebrating International Women's Day, brought to you by JPMorgan Chase.
That's an incredible show, but don't worry, we'll be back Friday, 9:30 a.m. for our regular ChedHER program, where we continue to honor trailblazers and females. Stay with us, though. More Cheddar coming up next.